Global MCII, realizing just transitions. Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP30 in Billy.
Very good morning.
Very good
and
morning.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes, now I'm audible.
A very good morning, everyone here in Billy and everyone who's listening and attending this event online. My name is Simone Sandholz. I'm leading an academic division with the United Nations University's Institute for Environment and Human Security in Bonn, in Germany. And I warmly welcome you to this event called Making International Mechanisms Fit for Adaptation and Loss and Damage, Insights from Community Level. Let me start by heartfelt thanks to the organizers of this event and to all the technical team who had to fix very last-minute glitches here. We are the very first event here at COP30. So we're a little bit of the guinea pigs here, but it's also very exciting to have this topic of community-led action starting and kicking off this pavilion, and we're sincerely thankful for that. When I say I'm of course now only kicking this event off, but this is a joint co-event from UNU-EHS and IIASA, the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis. You will later on get to know my colleague Reinhard Mechler from IIASA, who's joining us virtually. And we have a very nice list of speakers today. So why are we talking about this topic of community-led action? When entering the COP venue this morning, I saw that at least it seems, and I perceive that the community level and that indigenous groups, that local activist groups are very strongly represented here, rightfully so. At the same time, we need to ask ourselves, how far are we taking up community-led initiatives, whether in urban or rural contexts, in the global frameworks, how far are they recognized, and what can we do from a science, from a policy perspective, from an implementation perspective, and bringing all of that together. So that is what we're going to do over the next little less than 60 minutes, because we started slightly late. And we want to start from giving 2 short presentations from ongoing research and policy work, just to give some food for thought. We then have a few reflections, and at the end already, please prepare joining the discussion here, at least the people being physically present in Berlin, to give your reflections, to give your questions, and start discussing with us critically before we wrap up. And that is where I now would like to hand over to my colleague Lucas Turmena, who's also from United Nations University, who will give us an insight on local level action from a study that was done on responses to losses and damage and informal urban settlements. So Lucas is a senior researcher with UNU-EHS, and the floor is yours right now.
Not really, right? Yeah, now it works. It's a little bit warm in here, right? Hi, good morning, everyone. So as Simone just introduced me, I'm Lucas Turmena. I'm a senior research associate at United Nations University. A small contribution, a small provocation maybe, on the need for localizing loss and damage. And I'll do that from the perspective of informal urban settlements, bringing some of the discussions, some of the results of a research that we conducted in UNU-EHS that we call Loss and Damage in Informal Urban Settlements, or LADIUS for short. So the whole idea starts with the consideration that all disasters are local. So when we talk about loss and damage, we have to consider that, because although we can see some underlying root causes that are shared by different events, the way that they materialize, it's highly dependent on several factors locally. So we can see, for example, a very, very brief example here, a similar hazard hurricane. I don't know what's happening. Yeah, but I can see here. A similar hazard, the Hurricane Irma, but also the Typhoon Haiyan had a very similar magnitude, but caused very different results on the ground. And to understand that, we really have to deep dive into the conditions that shape the vulnerabilities locally. When we talk about loss and damage, this is also deeply contextual. We can talk about the most immediate ones that came to our minds, economic ones, material ones, but we should also go beyond that to see how this is expressed also in non-economic, immaterial loss and damage. And this really depends on the local context. This is an illustration that comes in a translation of the study that we did to a children's book to try to explain how loss and damage can also assume different forms depending on the context. For example, losing some documents in a normal situation might be annoying, but for an immigrant living in an informal urban settlement, this might be a huge disruption in his or her daily life. The idea of this study then, it is a study that was funded by Misereor, conducted by UNU-EHS, was basically to place informal urban settlements at the center of the debate. So really identify what are specific vulnerabilities linked to these all very different processes of urbanizations that we understand under this umbrella term of informality. Obviously, informality is a very broad term that includes a variety of different settlements, but also a variety of different processes of urbanization. But it's still useful for us to put this agenda or to put this specific context under the spotlight for the discussion. In this study, three case studies, one in Brazil, Jardim Pantanal in São Paulo, Kibera in Nairobi, Kenya, and also Kalibaro in Jakarta, Indonesia. Each one with their own very specific characteristics. As I mentioned before, they're informal settlements, but they are shaped by very different types of urbanization processes. So in Brazil, we can see a patchworked landscape of fragmented infrastructure provided by the local municipality, but also provided by community-led initiatives. In Kibera, it's really defining how the illegality status of informal urban settlements also defines the denial of services. And in Kalibaro, it's really clear for us how the colonial era infrastructure also shapes an uneven distribution and access to services. Although we have a lot of differences in this case, we can also identify some common traits, common aspects among these three cases. And one of them that is particularly relevant for us to discuss urban informal settlements is how land tenure security or insecurity is a key factor in shaping vulnerability, both before a disaster happening, so limiting the capacity to prevent or to prepare for climate risk, but also after a disaster happens. So also limiting or excluding individuals, excluding groups from reconstruction problems, from compensation programs. So this is highly relevant for us to discuss loss and damage. And when we localize the discussion to urban informal settlements, land tenure insecurity is one of the key factors. In this study, we could identify several loss and damage that we grouped in three main categories. But more important than that, maybe, we also identified many community-led initiatives, many community-led approaches that help us to think about alternatives on how to avert, minimize, and respond to loss and damage. So we could see some actions on the ground that were able to measure loss and damage, that were able to track these loss and damages locally, but also in the absence of an institutional response, very often community-led actions were the first or the only response, immediate response that these communities had. So just to conclude maybe this provocation, and this is again an illustration for this children's book that came out of the study. For loss and damage mechanisms to work in urban informal settlements, they must be grounded in the territory, recognize the right to stay. Obviously, when I'm saying that, I'm saying staying in dignified conditions, safe conditions, and build on local knowledge and existing community-led action. Also, grounding in the territory for us also means speaking the language of people there in this territory. That's why also this kind of translation of knowledge, using different formats of knowledge, is also important for us to disseminate the discussion and localize it into urban informal settlements. So thank you.
Thank you. So let's see which microphone is working on. Yeah, thank you so much. And it's really nice seeing this children's book now shaping up. I'm pretty emotional about it. So now we are trying the next level in this organization, in this side event, which is shifting to our virtual speaker joining us from Austria, and I hope Reinhard Mechler can hear us.
Because yeah. Hello.
Behind me. So Reinhard is a principal research scholar and group leader of Systemic Risk and Resilience Group at the Advancing Systems Analysis Program of IIASA. Unfortunately, he can't be here in Berlin, but hey, at least it's cooler in your place, I guess, Reinhard. And we are going to hear about, well, his speech on local case studies, more from an adaptation focus right now, and around the need to enhance adaptation effectiveness, avoid reaching the limits of adaptation, and also thinking about how can we gear ourselves towards designing transformative adaptation pathways. So the floor is yours, Reinhard, and I hope you could hear us, and we can hear you now. Let's try.
Yeah. Thanks, Simone. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Yeah, somebody? Yeah, somebody? It's okay, it's working okay, Simone? It's okay, it's working okay. I'll just start then, right, if nobody... Yeah, no, though, hello from Vienna, like I work at IIASA. I'm also German, actually, excited to be in the German Pavilion. Couldn't be at COP, but it also, that makes sense. Yeah, I wanted to basically build what Lucas presented, right? So Lucas made the point for localization, for the local agenda. Totally agree, but then the question is, how do we link up to global debate, like on global mechanisms? And as you know, loss and damage, there's the fund and the funding arrangements. So how do we integrate those worlds, so this knowledge, the knowledge across those systems? And Lucas talked a bit about translation and so on. So I think the issue is a bit that, yeah, how does stuff get lost in translation? So how do we make sure local information doesn't get lost in these global debates? But it does, of course, and that's maybe the gist of my presentation. I want to focus a little bit on Peru, and also, but present also some insights, more global insights. The work is with practical action as part of the Zurich Climate Resilience Alliance, and also a little bit with Zurich University. So Switzerland also present in the German Pavilion. Okay, let's move to the next slide, please. Yeah. Tools and methods. So there's tools and methods that can be used for loss and damage assessment. Here's a quick overview from a recent practical action. So a key partner in our alliance, practical action compiled. The bottom line is we can use assessment tools from climate adaptation and from disaster risk reduction domains. If we do the economic part of it, you see lots of like tick boxes. So a lot of stuff can be done on income, on physical assets, on individual impacts. You see some axes here, but you see more axes on the non-economic losses and damages. When we come to the stuff that Lucas talked about, that Simone talked about, so the non-economic part, the non-economic elements that are so dear and important for the loss and damage debate. So cultural heritage, territory, Lucas just mentioned, right? And indigenous knowledge, things like that. And they often fall through the crack, right? It's very important to consider, but it's hard to put this into some information that can be picked up also at more national global debates. But there's tools, and in principle it can be done, but how can it be done better? Next slide, please. Yeah, I think some slides somehow, I think I had some more slides, but some slides disappeared, it seems. Okay. Maybe, yeah, somehow something happened with the upload. Right. Yeah, but hey, it doesn't matter, actually. Let's continue. So there was looking a bit more in principle into what's available and what can be done. But the question is a bit, what do we found at local level? So just to support my message about this getting lost in translation. Here's some work Practical Action is doing in the Cusco region, southern Peru, Opis Lake, there's glacial lake outburst floods. And if you go to the next one, next slide, I hope my information is there. Yeah, there's also flooding and landslides. And here you see a little table that Practical Action compiled of the work they're doing on how human life and health is impacted and also damp. So that's more the loss part. Loss of life, very unfortunate. So that's tough. But also loss of provision of education and things like that. And the bottom is the damage. And of course, we know that well, right? On the loss part, where it matters, livelihoods, the non-economic part, quite often it's not valued. So things come in qualitative terms, and then it's forgotten when you go to the global debate. Damages can be assessed, and it's in soul, Peruvian soul, so numbers can be put to that. But the big picture is not perfect. It's a bit missing, and something gets lost in that translation that we need to go to the global debate. And I'm not suggesting we monetize everything, of course, but how do we account for that, and how do we provide a more comprehensive picture on what people are losing in the face of the climate emergency? So compiled by Practical Action. If you go to the next slide, please. I hope they came through. Oh yeah, University of Zurich is also doing work in the Cusco area and the Ancash region. You can go to the next slide. Here just, field work with, interviews with people, so residents, practitioners, experts, 150 interviews. And the question has been a bit about adaptation constraints and adaptation limits. I just wanted to bring across this issue, which is getting quite some recognition in the loss and damage debate. Some photos here, so they're really active in the field. Maybe next slide, please. And the bottom line being here, it's important to think about the constraints. So what does constrain people in the adaptation action that they need to take and have to take? And there's many. There's lack of funding, there's perceptions, there's human resources, and inequality is very important. So the inclusion part, very important. If it comes together, then if many constraints interact and they become hard rather than soft, we can talk about adaptation limits. Of course, that's a big debate about the loss and damage discussion. So that's a big part of the loss and damage discussions. So losing lives is part of this, but also mental health, shelter, livelihoods, food and economic insecurity are big ones that you could argue this is where the limits are being met. And what do we do about this? How do we report on that? And how can we take action and avoid, of course, those somewhat unavoidable impacts from happening? Yeah, can we go to the next slide, please? I think I'm trying to wrap up. Oh yeah, no, it pops up. Okay, I got it. Okay, here's a bit, this is a busy slide. We can report on that in a certain policy framework that we developed with Flood Resilience Alliance. It's now the Climate Resilience Alliance. Here's the gap logic comes in. If you don't mitigate, then we have a mitigation gap, then it goes on, adaptation gap, protection gap, response gap. The idea is about resilience becoming existential, leading into existential risk if you don't act on resilience. So next one, please. Yeah, so it's a bit complicated. Hope you can look at this later. The bottom line is a bit this gap logic that is quite relevant at the COPs, the mitigation gap, the adaptation gap. If you can escalate this into the protection gap, lack of finance, insurance, but social protection, as well as the response gap, if you can escalate it in that direction, we can report on those non-economic impacts also that I mentioned before. And then if we go to the left-hand side of the slide, I would argue that's the loss and damage part, the fund for loss and damage and the loss and damage funding arrangements. This can be the sweet spot where loss and damage should look at, and that this makes loss and damage also different from adaptation. So this framework is complex, difficult, but we presented a few times. Ideas being that loss and damage is overlapping, of course, with adaptation, but it's also distinct. That seems quite important. The next one, and then I'm almost done, promise. Yeah, maybe click twice again, sorry, another time, because I'm running out of time. Yeah, so here's this gap logic, and then you can see from top to bottom how information can be also like put together. And if you go from top to bottom, we talk about NAPs and NDCs, insurance, then state insurance comes in. But the big issue being, if where the issues hit the bottom, right, this is where households are suffering. So here, households bear the burden, and there's adaptation limits to their capacity to adapt to a changing climate. But here, for example, in Peru, we got remote Andean communities that indeed are facing the limits, but they get lost in translation indeed. They're not being heard, it's not being reported, it's not being taken forward into the NDCs or the NAPs. And there's something that's important. So that needs attention. It can be done in principle, but quite often it doesn't happen. Last slide, I think, please. Yeah, so yeah, loss and damage can appear in NAPs and NDCs and in other documents, tools and methods available. And we also got those frameworks, and I just went into that. It's colorful, it's a little bit complex, but it can be accessed later on. But the limits to adaptation need to be reckoned with, and quite often it's about the non-economic part to that. The non-economic part matters a lot, I would argue, but quite often it's not considered. Can we do a better job, and can we build also like more action around this, more reporting, and bring this also to global discussions that you are pursuing now in Berlin. That's it. I got a very last slide, just some publications that we have done and practical action as well as Zurich have done. Maybe if you click on it again, yeah. So that's for your information. Sorry, I hope I didn't run too much over time. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you so much, Reinhard. Thank you so much, Reinhard, for that. And sorry to the audience. I think it was a bit tricky with the audio on occasions. Apologies for that. But as Reinhard said, you can also get the slides afterwards if you want to. Reinhard, maybe just trying to provoke you with a very short additional question. We now heard two presentations around the need to act on this community level, and both of you have presented quite nice research. Maybe just in very short, where would you see very particular gaps in both research and policy, and in bridging research to policy, like in 2 sentences, because then I continue here with the panel in Berlin.
Me or Lucas? Me, I guess.
Yes, please.
Yeah. I mean, this lived experiences I find quite exciting, right? Narratives of losses and damages. Not talking about doom and gloom, but also taking that into the transformation debate. So people's livelihood affected, but they take action, and can there be narratives around that, and can this not be considered also in the debate? Not focus always on the dollar euro numbers. There were 3 lines, but yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much. And well, thanks. And I hope we are better audible to you than you are to us on occasions, because there's competing pavilions here in Berlin. I think we're a little bit the guinea pig session where this is the level of audio still being tried out. But you see, I already got one more speaker here, which is Lucas, who presented before. And this is the point of time where I would now like my fellow panelists to join us up here, because we have a very exciting run up here. I will introduce them one by one while they're speaking, but it's Dulari Parmar from UVA India, it's Clara-Luisa Weichelt from Misereor, and Sönke Kreft from the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative. But while they're taking a seat, same question to you. After your nice presentation, where would you, Lucas, see particular gaps in the research, but then also research to policy on the question of making this international, like the session question?
Oh, there's, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that the idea of this report that I just presented was actually to start filling these gaps that we can still see. For example, we talked about the need for localization, translation to local knowledge, but there's still a gap in how to do that, or how to incorporate that at scale. we identified, for example, many measures that were applied, or community-led initiatives that were applied locally in all three cases. But the gap between doing that locally in one single case and having a more institutional approach to make it happen for all is still a gap to be worked on.
Thank you so much. And that is where I'm now handing over to Dulari Parmar. I think you could also have all mics. Who's the lead of climate justice at Youth for Unity and Voluntary Action, YUVA, India. And I mean, I got to say, I'm a big fan of you and what you're presenting usually. So I want to give you the word to talk a little bit beyond, because you're the one working on the ground. You're the one working with local communities in India and many cities. So what else is needed beyond these identified gaps? And you've been working with also community-led data and in different kinds of approaches. So what is needed in terms of approaches? What does make your approach very powerful? Where do we perhaps need to think beyond the boundaries that we feel right now?
Thanks so much, Simone, for the introduction. And hola, boa tarde. That's all Portuguese I know, but good afternoon, everyone. And thanks for having us. I think thank you for German Pavilion and the organizers for having here, and Simone for thinking of us for so long. Lucas's presentation actually set the tone for a lot of the points that I was supposed to make. So thanks for that, Lucas. But the point that I'd like to highlight here is that before that, I just introduced myself. Youth for Unity and Voluntary Action is a 41-year-old organization working across thematics of habitat, land rights, youth rights, child rights, and very recently climate justice. And in our work on climate justice at the grassroots, we have come to understanding that a lot of loss and damage in our communities is often manufactured. And it's not just climate disasters or natural, disasters, but it's manufactured very systemically. And by systemically, I have a few examples that I'd like to share from our work. We recently wrote for the Trialogue Journal, which was again hosted by UNU and Misereor. So, of course, so it's not just environmental crisis, but also a governmental crisis and a justice crisis and a justice issue that Lucas rightfully highlighted. So I'd like to highlight two examples, take some time on highlighting our work on informality and infrastructure projects, and beyond that, highlighting our grassroots work on community climate action planning. So I'll give you an example from our city, which is close to Mumbai, on the north of Mumbai, which is called Vasai Virar, where 4 infrastructure projects are proposed. And these infrastructure projects are often, shown as good green infrastructure projects to increase mobility, to increase transport. However, these very infrastructure projects lead to displacement. And this displacement leads to not just, a violation of housing rights, habitat, but also a lot of loss and damage, which is linked to dispossession and displacement. So that's one important fact. And just to highlight some numbers, because of these 4 infrastructure projects, 2.5 lakh people will be displaced from that community. So when we're talking about development and climate resilient development, how do we really ensure that people are not displaced by these climate projects? How can we ensure that greenwashing is not at the front of our climate action? And we really talk about justice. And when we talk about justice, we talk about housing rights and climate resilient infrastructure, which does not end up, creating more loss and damage for the community, for the people. And beyond that, the second example that I'd like to highlight is on our community climate action planning work, where we work with the youth from the community to understand climate and social vulnerabilities in urban poor settlement or informal settlement, as we call it. So I'm borrowing an example from Ambujwadi, which is located on the west coast of Mumbai, which is a densely populated 60,000 people living in Ambujwadi. And now when we work with the youth on locally led vulnerability assessment, we realize that a lot of these loss and damage is tied with tenure security, like Lucas mentioned. So if the power of being able to be resilient or to being able to be adapt to local climate impacts largely depends on your tenure security and housing rights. So to inform this issue and to work at it at the local level, what we did was we came up with a community climate action planning process, which is a long iteration process. Over the 5 years, we have been understanding how do you really map vulnerabilities at the local level and how do we respond to it. So with the local government, we look at local level adaptation measures, which can include stormwater drainage, which can include greening and open space in the community. A very small intervention took almost 8 months because there was no land security. And this means that a lot of this intervention needs to be systemic, needs to be linked to our city planning and development planning initiatives at the larger level. And to end my presentation, I'd like to say that the current approach for loss and damage is always relief. You know, you provide tarpaulin sheets or you provide water when there's crisis. But we need to move beyond relief and into systemic solutions, which can talk about housing, which can talk about participatory planning, which can talk about people's right in, informing climate planning. So I'd like to end that recognizing informal settlements as sites of knowledge, where knowledge can be produced, and grassroots approach really makes that world of a difference. So I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Dulari, for this impressive overview. And I think we could already identify some commonalities between what Lucas and you shared, though from very different geographies. And you rightfully made the point around being centered in injustice approaches. So moving on to Clara-Luisa Weichelt, who's a desk officer for urban development in Latin America from Misereor, with whom we've been also working for years now very successfully. So talking about this human rights perspective and community-led action that should be linked to human rights perspective. So from the Misereor perspective, or from the perspective of civil society organizations, how do you want to see human rights implications being addressed with respect to the climate crisis and also in the context of informality? So what is needed and what would you expect also from this COP to bring this to international mechanisms?
No. Now, I think now it's working? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Simone, and thank you to the other speakers. I think Dulari already made very clear how community-led solutions can work to really address climate impacts and how solutions come from the ground level. I work in the Latin American department for Misereor on urban development, and actually I arrived here 1 week ago. I had the possibility to go to Sao Paulo and meet some Misereor partner organizations there, and really had the opportunity to get to know some beautiful projects. So yeah, I will talk a little bit more about that later, but I think in the first place, talking about human rights implications, it's important to say that losses and damages really can lead to severe human rights violations, but in many cases it affects those people who are already suffering or are already deprived of their basic rights. This is also what we see in the last week. We visited some informal settlements, also Jardim Pantanal in Sao Paulo, that is part of the study that Lucas just presented. People living close to the rivers, in very dense settlements with unsecure tenure situations, and so they are already deprived of basic human rights, so losses and damages really can worsen their situation. So this is also for Misereor like the point of departure of the work that we are doing. First of all, our goal is to improve the living conditions for people who live in poverty and contribute that they can live in dignity, like that everybody can live in dignity, because only when you have access to adequate housing, to basic infrastructure, services, water, sanitation, education, then you are also more resilient and less vulnerable against the climate crisis. So this is really important for our work that we do together with partner organizations. And then It's also important to say that we always work with a people-centered approach, so local vulnerable communities, from our point of view, they should not be seen as victims or like passive victims of what they experiences, but they are really protagonists and in the forefront of developing solutions, as we heard from Dulari, and this is also like what I could experience last week. They are really self-organized housing projects and solidarity projects powered by solar energy that are organized by the community. Communities really are the ones who contribute to the solutions. They also contribute to create public and green spaces, improve their urban settlements, create urban forests, or the restoration of slopes and ecosystems that are all like solutions that can help to tackle the impacts of climate crisis on the ground. So this is why for of the solutions is to really strengthen community organization, leadership trainings, capacity building. These are fundamental pillars of our work, and just only when we build solidarity also with the communities, I think we can also find functioning solutions on the ground. And maybe another thing that we try to support as Misereor is sensitization or sensibilization work and visibilize the efforts of these community-led solutions in spaces like these, in international negotiations, but also on national level and local level, because we think that it's important that on a multi-governance level, these community perspectives, but also community efforts are recognized and taken into consideration.
Thank you so much, Clara, for that intervention. And with that, I would like to move to our last panelist here, which is Sönke Kreft, who's the Executive Director of the Munich Climate Insurance Initiative. And now I want to zoom out a bit to the more global perspective, because on the one hand, we keep saying that we need to pay attention to the community level, we need to make that heard in the global mechanisms, but what exactly, on the one hand, can we expect to happen during COP30 with respect to processes, decisions that are linked to the community level? But MCII also is very much engaged with different UNFCCC processes, including the Santiago network, which is key for loss and damage. Where do you see then also on a personal level opportunities to address the needs that were identified by the fellow panelists?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Simone. Acoustics are a bit challenging up here, so I hope it works for all of you and for me as well. So basically we are working on disaster finance and insurance, but crucially also the respective governance mechanisms, and I've personally followed also the loss and damage negotiations already for quite some years, and I think there was a major win for the topic with deciding on the fund for responding to loss and damage, and specifically the governing instruments. Yeah, now we even have music, excellent. The governing instruments puts out the vision for community access. So I think this, as I said, was a major win about 3 years ago, and now there's of course the question on how to operationalize it. I have some good news, but I might also have some bad news for that, because the fund, they decided already on their kind of initial set of activities. The word is the Barbados implementation modalities. And in that, the fund is open up for business. So we are looking forward to see probably the call coming out today. But at the same time, they also said that this community access modality is going to be put to the long-term plan. So it's not part of the Barbados implementation modality. It is in the sense of an aspiration, but the Barbados implementation modality will mostly focus on national level institutions and country-led systems. So that brings me maybe to the first conclusion. to move forward this debate. Long term, of course, we hope to see a specific funding modality being created for a community level within the institutional arrangement of the fund. But short term, I think it is about anchoring community voices also in the national processes. So in countries setting up national response system, making sure that community actors are involved in the process, but also in setting up the target for the national systems. One area where we have been involved, or I personally was involved, is with the Warsaw International Mechanisms. There are different expert groups, and within these expert groups we are mandated or tasked to develop more granular guidance, and we had the task from, I don't know, the COP in Madrid, to develop a compendium on comprehensive risk management as a group. And basically there was a call for countries to submit case studies. There was also a call in the transitional committee for the fund, and we relied on these information, and we systematized and organized them. Usually a compendium is a bit of a boring exercise. You basically stack together different case studies. So we tried a different approach and really try to inspire also different actions across the different categories, similar to what Reinhard laid out with the different gaps. And so one of the take-home messages we got was that action is happening on all scales, but we can't really point to one country that is already employing a comprehensive risk management approach for all the different actions. So I hope that the document is also used as an inspiration for countries now setting up their respective national response systems, clearly also safeguarding the role of local actors within these response systems.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Sönke, for that. And it's getting ever more challenging now with the music next to Pavilion, right? So we should perhaps start dancing instead of discussing. At the same time, this is where I now want to open up to you who are with us in the audience. You've heard quite provoking interventions. We didn't yet have the space for either asking questions or giving further comments. If you perhaps want to also share some findings from your own work or some gaps that you would see. So if there's anyone who already wants to speak, oh yeah, I'm coming. Perfect. I don't need an icebreaker question. That's perfect. And I hope this handheld mic is working right now.
First of all, thank you very much. I think this is an excellent event. Even if you're focusing on urban dimension of loss and damage, I'm Sylvie Wabbs. I'm working in the FAO, Food and Agriculture, and we're really trying to also develop some guidance on loss and damage across the agri-food system. That means from production to consumption. I personally find very enlightening these structure of the needs, the three-level analysis and perspective that broke the physical risk to lives with the survival needs, the basic needs of life, and then the well-being. And these three dimensions are very essential because we cannot just look at survival, and the needs and the well-being is very essential in the whole suite of risk, impacts, and loss and damage management and this portfolio of solution. So I just want to thank you all and just say that a lot of what was presented from an urban perspective and informal settlement also apply for an agri-food system, the sort of agriculture and food sectors perspective. And we know that in many of the less developed countries and the SIDS, 80% of the people have agriculture-based livelihoods. So just wanted to thank you for that and seeing the convergence, and this is very much needed on the solutions that we work out together that are not only sector-specific but valid across the whole spectrum and not just emergency response. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone from the panel who wants to add to that? And apologies for skipping a little bit over the rural part. I think that was partly because of the audio, because Reinhard's presentation was a bit more on that side. Anyone who wants to add on it? If not, are there any more oh yes, on the other side? It's actually good moving here because there's a bit of ventilation.
Yes, thank you very much for this excellent panel. I have one question. I'm curious about your answers. Dulari, you mentioned that it is not only the task to look at the basic needs, and it is more the task to also look at the systemic level. So my question to all of you is how this systemic level can be addressed with the current mechanisms, and which actors are in the lead to do so.
Yeah, I'll maybe go ahead and respond based on our experience at the local level. For us, systemic level feels too far of a reach if you're working at the grassroots. So the closest system for us is the ward level or the local level government. So I think having very trusted relationships with the local government really helps. I'll also actually quote Bijal ji from MHT. She mentions that climate action work is a lot of coordination work. It's less scientific, it's less adaptive, or it's less about loss and damage. It's more about coordination between different departments at the local level, at the state level, at the national level. So for us, to really uncover the systemic level, we start by facilitating people's collectives at the local level, which becomes pressure group at the local level, at the grassroots, which then hold the local government accountable for a lot of their implementation work. And then beyond that, one systemic opportunity that we also find in urban areas is looking at city development plans. In India, city development plans are made every 20 years, so these are very public and very statutory processes where public participation is often mandated, is almost mandated. However, government tries to, bypass people and make their own plans. So since past 20 years or 2 decades, UA has been ensuring that people's participation is ensured in city development plans in cities that we work in. So these are some two systemic ways that we are engaging.
Well, I think I'm going to highlight just one of the points that I made in my presentation. I think it also serves as a way of mediating between the immediate needs and the systemic level. And again, for me, in relation to urban informal settlements, is centering the debate on land tenure security and how people access and guarantee their right to stay. This is a way for us to dialogue with the systemic structures that led to this uneven access to services, infrastructure. I commented, for example, Jakarta, the colonial infrastructure, and so on. This leads also, or is directly connected in a more immediate level to the land tenure security. And this also, as a way of mediation or translation, for me leads to two implications. One of them is considering that climate-induced or evictions or benevolent evictions, these evictions that present themselves as a benevolent act towards the community, are already a loss and damage. And also that funding mechanisms, they have to be programmatically flexible to also include land tenure security as one of the concerns to be addressed. So we can go beyond relief, we can go beyond the immediate response to loss and damage and really address the root cause of vulnerability.
I think, working? Okay. I think it's very important to have this multi-level approach to really consider the different levels and strengthen their working together. And I think, obviously the local level is the closest to the local community, so it would be the first address to work together with them. But I think also for national policies, it's important to consider the impacts for communities and the international level. That's why we're here, right? And one aspect, maybe to add on what Luca said, I think it's also important to say that these resettlement programs that can come from the national level or the local level, they do not lead, in most of the cases, to an improvement of the situation of the communities that live there, but rather they lead to a resettlement to another risk area. So I think this is also very important to make that clear, that in the end, if there's no safe alternative for those communities, and in many cases it's not happening this way, they are just ending up in another risk area.
I guess I also need to say something, so maybe also tying together both comments and questions. So for me, there's a big opportunity also now with the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage and countries really venturing into setting up national response systems to de-silo different communities. So we need to bring together the climate change adaptation community. We need to bring together the disaster risk reduction community, but also the response community. But in doing so, we must also go beyond on what the individual communities try to achieve. So I think generally countries have made good progress in avoiding direct fatalities after disasters over the last decades. But the challenge really is also how to protect the livelihoods, not only how to protect the lives. And for me, that is one of the, in a way, systemic asks I have to the new setup on the country level, that the discussions are much closer tied to the social protection agenda, to the financial protection agenda, so that at the end of the day, we're not only protecting lives, but we're also protecting livelihoods.
Thanks so much for this. I will give you the power of the last question of this session.
Thank you. It's a privilege and honor to be part of this great discussion happening. And just to introduce myself, my name is Tirthor Prasad Soikia. I work with an organization called Leeds, based in Assam, in northeast part of India. It's a very strategic location, the northeast part of India, which is bordered by 99.9% international border with China, Myanmar, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and Nepal. And that's how the region is becoming very strategic for investment and infrastructure building through India's Act East policy and other global policies that is being generated by China and the other European countries. It's very interesting to experience and witness the kind of devastation we have been facing because of big hydropower projects in the eastern Himalayan region. It's really worrisome that more than 80,000 megawatts of electricity have been planned to generate from our region, which is actually causing untold miseries in the downstream, where communities have been affected with flooding, erosions, and other lot of water-induced crises. So in this context, I have to question how community can be benefited through loss and damage, because corporate and the corporations have been directly part of this devastation for years and years, and how we can ensure that corporations who are part of commissioning dams, they are fulfilling corporate accountability and the hydropower management in the downstream for the downstream people, and how community can access the universal tool of loss and damage from the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Who dares bridging this to the international context and to access to loss and damage funding in general, if we may generalize that slightly? Anyone dares? I know, that's a tricky one.
Just to also add, in fact, IIASA also works in Assam, in Guwahati, where we are looking at expanding the community climate action planning at the local level in an urban poor community in Guwahati. But to actually respond to your question, I think dealing with large corporations for a small organization is a big challenge. And in the infrastructure project example that I shared today, there were 4 big infrastructure projects, and these infrastructure projects are made by big, large international companies who have, assigned consultants to do local level planning and consultation at the local level. And in 2021, UA did a thorough research on what these reports say and what are the disparities in real life. So for instance, the report mentioned that only 194 households will be demolished because of these projects. However, our research showed that 9,400 households will be demolished. So you can see underrepresentation and very intended underrepresentation of destruction, demolition, displacement in these official reports. That's one point. So what civil society can actually start with, like we did, was to have action research based approach to really look at on ground what are the impacts of these projects and how can then we advocate for it. But again, that advocacy is a big challenge, and that's where all failures or all roadblocks come in. So we need bigger civil society organizations, and again in this climate of where the national government is trying to really have a focus on what civil society does, so that's a very challenging space. I'd like to, just stop here.
Thank you so much. Very short one.
Can also try to dare. I mean, first, thank you for also giving an example why the discussion on loss and damage are often difficult, and it's not only necessarily, say, the climate impact, but it's also development choices that result to concrete loss and damage situation at the community level. The only thing I want to say is that I think the problem starts first by acknowledging it and by seeing it as well. So there's also a linkage here in the UNFCCC discussions with the GGA, the Global Goal on Adaptation, and the indicators, because we think, okay, these are to judge international progress. But if you look at it, for example, now the national adaptation plans, they're also referring to the GGA. And if we anchor also the right set of indicators, we will be able to push countries to set the indicators so that they also matter to the community level, and that struggles on the ground can become apparent also for the international community.
I think we now have to wrap this event up. We started slightly late. That's why they gave us a little bit of an extra time. So maybe we can have one very, very quick last round, one sentence only. So this has been the very first event in the German Pavilion. Just imagine we also would have the closing event in this pavilion. So now we're talking about what we want to see COP30 to do and what we wanted to reach. So thinking 2 weeks or 10 days ahead, what could be, in your perspective, one particular outcome you would like to see in favor of local community support?
I think that we have high expectations about this COP, about it being the COP of people. So I really want to see these voices being protagonists in the debate.
I would like to highlight on means of implementation. Developing countries need finances, and without finances, any of this is not possible. So really pushing for climate finance through COP30 is the biggest agenda.
I think it's very, now it's loud. I think it's very important to really showcase the solutions that are already pushed by local communities, and I hope that it will be a space where these experiences can be visibilized and recognized also within this COP, and it has to be assured that there are really participatory mechanisms in place so that local communities can have a voice in these international spaces as well.
Okay, quick one. So this COP will do that's very techy, the review of the Warsaw International Mechanism. We have seen some progress in loss and damage specifically over the past years, but these institutions, they need to speak to each other. So it's the Warsaw International Mechanism, it's the Santiago Network, it's the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. And if I have one wish, looking 10 days ahead, is that actually the theme of this event is going to be anchored in that review and will also guide the action for these institutions in the coming years.
Thank you. Thanks to the panel, but also thanks to you as an audience for staying with us for the last hour and listening to us. Thanks to the online panel attendees, and wishing you all a very nice and successful COP30. Thank you.
Global Mechler, realizing just transitions. Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP30.